Well, we are joined today here with an adoptee from Syracuse, New York, and this is Bob. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for
Hi,
having me. Real
thanks for coming
pleasure.
on.
Yeah, thanks. And you're a professor there in Syracuse in your office, so
Yes, in my office
environmental.
here.
Yeah.
So it makes it seem a little more formal than it probably needs to be, but
No, it's nice. Environmental studies, very important.
yeah, thanks.
Flex that professorness.
Yes, thanks.
So tell us however you want to tell your story. Where were you born? Maybe we start there.
Well, I'm actually I live in upstate New York, but I'm not from the East. I was actually born in Albuquerque, New Mexico,
Hmm.
in 1971.
Oh,
And so I was born there in the early 70s, and I always knew I was adopted. I think that was probably kind of become quite standard by the late 60s and 70s, as adopted parents told them. So I knew I was adopted. I have and had an older sister who was adopted as well. We didn't come from the same birth family. But since I was born at that period, a period that you've covered a lot on your podcast, I knew absolutely nothing about my birth mother, birth father, birth family, whatever you want to say. And I have to say that even though I knew I was adopted, I always knew I was adopted. It was not something that was talked about in my family. And as I was preparing for this interview, it made me think about in my childhood and adolescence, besides my sister, I never met another person who was adopted.
really?
So I think because of that, and because that was also a time of matching, I'm white, my sister's white, my parents are white. There wasn't like always like a visible marker of like my kind of adoption sort of out in the world. If say I was black, my parents were white, people are like, oh, are you adopted? So that was just not an issue. It's not something that I hid, but it wasn't something that was sort of kind of in your face. So, it's interesting being on this and talking for the fact of me being adopted. It's not, to be frank, something that at that time, when I was a kid or a teenager, thought a lot about. My parents never talked about it. Um, and I didn't know anybody outside my family besides my sister who was adopted.
Did you and your
Did
sister talk about it? Sorry. Yeah. At all? Like to say, oh, we're both adopted and just leave it at that or
No, it's not something that we talked a lot that I can remember about my when we were young. However, it's weird thinking back on it. I think the ways that I um, kind of my adoption sort of kind of came out was particular parts of media that I was attracted to. So, I as a kid of my era, I was very into Star Wars, and then I also really liked the Superman movie that came out around about those times. Well, Superman, if you go back, like Superman's adoption story,
yeah.
he flees Krypton, and his parents kind of send him away on Krypton, and he's adopted by this family in Kansas. And I definitely knew that I was attached to that movie and that story partly because of adoption, and then Star Wars as well. Like
Mhm.
Luke is adopted basically
Right.
by his aunt and uncle, so it's not a stranger adoption; adopted like kind of within the family. And then later on, when we were about 8, we got a dog, a Cocker Spaniel. We had to, and it was my dog, so I needed to name the dog. Well, I really liked this story that had been made. It was I guess a book first, a kid's book first, and it made it into a cartoon, and it was called The Puppy Who Wanted a Boy. And the puppy who wanted the boys for various reasons. This puppy in this story in this cartoon loses parents, ends up on this kind of journey, of trials and tribulations. But then where does the puppy end up? The puppy ends up finding a home at an orphanage for people. And there is a boy there that adopts the dog. And there's a commonality in the dog's life and the boy's life is that they are both adopted. And the boy names the dog that he's adopting at the orphanage Peter. And so when we adopted our dog, when I was 8, they asked my parents said, well, what do you want to name your dog? And I said, I want to name my dog Peter. So ironically, I mean, I think that's probably
Oh,
one of the ways that my adoption when I was a boy in adolescence manifested to myself. It's not even like I think about it kind of consciously. Like, I mean, I was clearly attracted to that story. And, Peter is not necessarily the most common name for a dog. It's not, Rough or Fido or something, right? So, but yeah, so that's why I named him the dog. So
Oh,
certainly at that
great.
time in my life, adoption is not something that I reflected a lot about, but that changed really drastically later in my life.
Were you close to your parents? I mean, did you always have a sense of difference with them?
There was I guess over time, a difference. I mean, there were kind of some physical markers. I think I'm fairly like average height or whatever. But my dad was an immense man. He was like 6'4". He wore a size 15 shoe. So, I mean, if anything, there would be a difference in that. Like, I mean, I guess in other ways, physically, we didn't look different, but that was definitely a marker of difference. Now, there was a change that happened that made me see kind of this difference a little later. And so I was adopted, my sister was adopted, but then I have a younger brother who's 13 years younger than me, and he is not. So he is the
Oh,
biological child of my parents. And there wasn't a lot of discussion about this, but my sense is before my sister and I was adopted, for whatever reason, my mom was not able to have a child or had a miscarriage or something like that. That was just really not discussed. But my sense that something like that had happened in the late 60s. And so there was a sense that she could not have children. And then lo and behold, in 1984, I had a brother, my brother's name is Ben, was born. And I'm very close to my brother despite that sort of age difference. But there were certainly changes that developed over time that, like, my brother is like my mother and my father. I mean, obviously there is the physical similarities. There's aspects of kind of his personality that is similar, and that, I mean, um, when going years later, like when I bring girlfriends to the house, or my ex-wife, I remember came and spent time with my family, and all my brother, my adopted sister, myself, and she came out and she's like, "You're nothing like your parents." And I told her, it's like, "Well, I'm adopted." And I think that really it threw her for a loop, because I think, like a lot of non-adoptees, just assume that who you are is primarily completely because of culture, it's because of
right.
family, it's because of nurture. And when you live in a situation like I did, I'm adopted, my brother is not, and you're just living in this kind of weird sort of experiment for your whole life. And I'm like, well, my brother is like my parents to a large degree because he's biologically related, and I'm not related to them.
And I
Yeah.
think now more than ever, it's believed that nature really is
Yeah.
Oh,
more, a
Yes.
yeah.
lot more than
Finally.
nurture.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think you probably read some of the same literature that I have. And, I'm an academic, so I tend to really delve into that. And particularly with the development of behavioral genetics,
Mm-hmm.
which has happened a lot since the 70s. And as you may know this as well, is that the behavioral geneticists, when they wanted to tease what's nurture, what's nature, well, we need to find an experiment. And so there's an experiment of our generation where you take people, infants who basically spend virtually no or absolutely no time with their biological family, and then you put them with the family. And if there's a way that you can do kind of personality tests on the biological mother or parents in general, the adopted parents and the kids, and you look at that over time, again, you probably know this from the literature I'm sure you've read, is that they find that there's a tremendous amount of similarities,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess broadly we'd say temperament, between biological children and their biological family who they've never met, and far less so with my adopted
Hmm.
family. And so
Hmm.
even though, I love my adopted family very much, if you put my birth mother in a room and then my adopted parents in a room, you'd have no trouble to see who I'm related to. I mean, we'll get to my birth mother later, who I
Yeah.
did find and meet. It's not just like I have a similarity, particularly a lot of facial similarities to her, but just as there's aspects of our temperament. If you talk to her for an
Hmm.
hour and you're talking to me today in this podcast, you'll be like, well, yeah, of course, like that's her mother. But I don't think you would feel that around anyone in my adopted family, because none of us are biologically related
Yeah.
in that. So we have that kinship, but we don't have a biological kinship.
Right.
100%. I mean, anecdotally, we can say that that's just true, right? Like,
Yes.
I can tell you
Mhm.
personally that
Yes.
you go in a
Yes.
room with people you're related to, you're like, oh, this is how it feels.
Yes.
Such a,
Yeah. And you
yeah.
go all these years, it sounds like two of you are in a similar circumstance from what I know about you.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I'm well into my adulthood before I even see anybody I
Yeah.
can see a photo of somebody who's been biologically related to me, and now I both, you know my birth mother and know a whole set of that kind of biological family, and so you see kind of those resemblances, both physical and to some extent temperamental, that you really go your whole life, much of your life,
Yeah.
with never knowing as an adoptee.
Mhm.
Hmm. So what was the trajectory of your life then? You grow up 13 years later, there's the brother. How
Mhm.
was your sister? Did you both fall into any sort of stereotypical adoptee roles, high achievers or
I don't know. I mean, I didn't do well necessarily at the beginning of high school, but towards the end, and I did do well in college, and that enabled me to go on and go to grad school and be um, a professor. My sister actually went on and she's a therapist now, and she lives in the Seattle area. And so we went kind of divergent paths. And then by the time, again, I was not fairly interested and thought much about my adoption, but what really changed me and changed my life is somebody who is a book you know well and a woman that you know somewhat, is that I read Ann Fessler's The Girls That Went Away
Oh,
when it was
yeah.
published around, in the mid 2000s or something like that. And when people had asked, I'll get to that book in a second, but when people had asked me, like, well, you're adopted, have you tried to find your birth mother? I imagine people ask you that. That was always like the first question when
Right.
people
Always.
felt they were adopted. And particularly women, they like really want to dish, like, oh, have you tried to find your mother? And they're kind of disappointed that I did not seem to have that much interest. And I said, well, I imagine she had good reasons giving me up for adoption. And maybe there were things that happened in the process of her getting pregnant and putting me for adoption, and might raise difficult feelings with her. And so I'm just not going to search. And then also it just seemed in the 80s and 90s, like, how would you even go about doing that? I didn't even know a process that was even possible at that time. Again, I didn't know anybody who was adopted except my sister. I didn't meet anybody in my
So
childhood and
interesting.
adolescence who was adopted. Like, so who am I going to talk to about this? Is before the internet really took off. So I read this book, and as you will know from reading that book yourself and having Ann Fessler on your podcast, is that these really kind of tortured stories of these women
Yeah.
who gave up their and often coerced into giving up their babies up for adoption. But at various points, like, she would talk to these birth mothers, and some of them might have been in their 60s. Like, you haven't found your child? Do you think of the child you gave away 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago? And they're like, I think of him or her every day.
Mm.
And that really hit me to think about that there might be a woman out there who had given me up adoption and had been wondering what had become of me, but felt, because she quote unquote gave me away, that she had no right to look for me.
had you
Um,
been given a story that, from that era we all go, oh, your mother was loved you so much, she
yes,
gave you away,
yes,
the
yes.
whole blah blah blah.
I and I have to be totally fair to my adopted parents, because if they said this to me, I would have been like four. And so in my mind, it was that they were a couple of college students and loved each other very much, and they couldn't care for me, so they put me up for adoption.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like, childhood, like, okay, that's great. Like, I'm not
Right.
gonna, the unexamined life is only life worth living, I guess, as a
Right.
child or adolescent. So I just like did think, like, okay, that sounds fine to me. But it was only later on that I thought that this
Huh.
might be different. And so in the wake of reading that book, really just like in a year after that book, I did a little more research. I'm a professor, I love to do research. So I did a little research, and I realized that New Mexico, where I'd been born, had a system. They're not just going to give you your file. Very few states, I think, have that now or had that then, but they had a confidential intermediary process. So they would, if I got a court order, they would open the file and they would give it to somebody else who would basically be a private detective for me and look.
Oh,
And so I
that's
went
interesting.
through the process of doing that. I had to pay some fees and sign some legal documents. And this confidential intermediary, this woman named Catherine, she was fantastic. I never met her. I mean, I really owe a large debt to her. But so she did this search for me. I mean, she was somebody who was appointed by the state who had this, the legal means to do it. So had my file, and then goes off and looks for her and finds her in a week, finds my birth mother in a week. It was apparently easy peasy, not very difficult. And so she asked me, she's like, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to send your birth mother, who does not know she's been found, we're going to send her a form to say, legally, if you can contact, like she's going to have to sign something and get it notarized. So I can contact her. So the state can basically be, okay, you want to do this? Okay, here we go. We'll let you talk to each other. So, but before that, Catherine, the intermediary, says, well, you need to, why don't you get some photos together and then write a couple-page letter to your birth mother, kind of what you've been up to for the past 38 years. And so I have to sit down and craft this letter to this birth mother. Again, I don't know her name. I don't know anything about her at this point, except she's been found, though of course she doesn't know she's been found. So I craft this letter. Um, and I'm trying to be very generous to her. Like, I realize you may not want to talk to me. The circumstances under which you gave me up, I mean, it might have been very traumatic and you don't want me coming back into your life. And I completely understand. But I just want to know, I'm done well, I'm happy. I was just remarried at that point. And so, my life's going well. And thank you. And so here's the letter. Here's some photos of me. And so I sent that to the intermediary, and she sends that off somewhere. I don't know where it's going. Now, again, I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I remember the night, um, so the confidential intermediary called me, said, like, look, we're waiting for the form, but it sounds like she's going to sign it. And I remember talking to my wife beforehand, like the night before I was probably going to have contact. And I said, I wonder if my birth mother's even from New Mexico.
I was just wondering that
I know.
Yeah,
myself.
is she from New Mexico? Because the girls who went away, and from that
Yeah.
book, they went on very long journeys. And so that kind of shook me that might be possible. And so, okay, so the next morning, at that point in time, I get a call from the confidential intermediary. Catherine is like, okay, so your birth mother has signed the form. She's eager to talk to you.
Oh.
Her name is Taylor, and she lives in College Station, Texas. I'm like, okay, well, maybe it's been a long time. She moved from New Mexico and moved to Texas. And so here's her number. And I'm going to contact her. You can call her in 10 minutes. So I'm just sitting in this kitchen
So
and
weird.
I'm like,
This is the
oh,
mid 2000s, you're saying?
yeah, this is 2008.
Okay.
Mhm.
And so I'm just like sitting there. My wife was at work and I'm just like alone in my kitchen. And I'm like, okay. So I dial the number 10 minutes later, and this woman says hello with this very thick Texas accent. And I'm from New Mexico, I'm from the Southwest. Not that you would necessarily know this, but New Mexico is not part of Texas, not part of the South. I don't have an identifiable accent. No one in my life has said like, oh, you must be from New Mexico. So we don't have that kind of accent, except I don't know, generic American accent, but like thick Texas accent. And so that's kind of blowing my mind to begin with. And so we began to talk about, she's eager to talk to me and the circumstances under which I was given up for adoption. And she said that, that was true. She was in college. So she was in college, 19 years old. She was at the University of Houston and had been there for a semester. And then I think it was kind of on the edge of the counterculture. And so going to a lot of rock concerts, smoking a lot of dope. It's kind of funny. It's like kind of a stereotype of the 60s. And she had a kind of good group of friends there. And she started dating a man named Tracy. And it's kind of confusing with the story because Taylor's traditionally a guy's name and Tracy's traditionally a boy's name. But my birth mother's name is Taylor. My birth father's name is Tracy. So they kind of go out. I mean, they're dating casually. It's not just like a hookup, but they're dating. And so they go out in like the fall of 1970, and then Taylor decides like she doesn't like the University of Houston for various reasons, and she goes back to her home, which is in a place called Tyler, Texas. Now, Tyler is very near Louisiana. It is not near New Mexico at all. I mean, it is a long, long way from New Mexico. So she ends up back in Tyler, and then I think they do long distance kind of relationship for a while, but kind of peters out. Well, not long after that, she gets the sense that
Yeah.
that she's pregnant. Now she comes from an upper, I guess I would say, an upper middle class family. Her father's a doctor in town, the only neurologist in Tyler.
Oh.
So she decides she cannot, she's not going to go see a doctor in her town because that doctor will know her dad. And she wants to see if this is really happening, maybe keep it secret. So she goes down the road, I don't know, an hour or two down to Dallas. She goes, Dallas, and they say, well, you're pregnant. You're 2.5 months pregnant. And Taylor's like, ugh. So she goes back to Tyler and she's like, well, there's no getting around it now. And she tells her parents. And so this is where the story, and you may know it if you read the article that I wrote about that, takes kind of a strange turn. So she tells her parents, and the first thing her mother says, well, you need to get an abortion. So abortion is not legal
Mexico's close.
in Texas at that point, and they don't decide to go to Mexico. They decide to go to Kansas, where abortion, I found out later, had just been legalized about 6 or 7 months earlier. So go on a plane and they go to Wichita, Kansas to have the procedure performed. And she goes into the clinic or doctor's office, whatever it was, and they're getting ready to perform the procedure. And the doctor examines her, and she really remembers the doctor saying something like, oh gosh, or something like that, and says, you're not 2.5 months pregnant, you're over 5 months pregnant, and I can't perform this procedure.
Oh.
So whether my sense, it wasn't necessarily illegal in Kansas, research that I did to perform an abortion that late, but that doctor may not have had the wherewithal. I mean, I understand that abortion gets more difficult, a little more difficult just from a kind of a medical standpoint, a procedure standpoint later in the pregnancy. But for whatever reasons, he couldn't perform the abortion, and there was no like a referral to somebody else. And so basically Taylor and her mother feels like, well, that's the end of that option. So they go back to Texas. And at that point, her parents do say like, okay, if you want to raise this child, we will help you. I mean, clearly that was not option one, but like there's another option. And Taylor felt that, I think she was thinking about what might become of her life. And, if she was just kind of capable of doing this. So she says no. And so as far as she tells, like her parents and an Aunt Jean is her name, and they kind of confer together and decide what's going to be done with adoption. Well, adoption is not going to happen in Tyler. And so she becomes one of the girls that went away. And so she goes on this road trip from East Texas near Louisiana all the way to Albuquerque, New Mexico, a place that no one in her family had ever been. So she isn't sent away on her own. She's sent away with her aunt. And so she goes with her aunt. It's about 1,000 miles away, and they drive over a couple days to Albuquerque, and they contact an adoption agency there, the only one in the state. And they find a place to live, and they just, it's probably like by that point, probably the last 4 to 3 months, probably 3 months by that point of the pregnancy, and wait for me to be born. It's weird. It's like she takes some classes at the University of New Mexico, like it's just like some summer program for unwed mothers. It's really kind of weird. Like she's kind of sitting in on classes waiting for me to be born. And then I am born at the end of July. She goes into labor. And so she's not completely alone. Her aunt is there, but I think as was fairly common still at that time, she's knocked unconscious during the actual delivery.
Yeah.
And so she's not awake when I'm born. And then they come in later and they say, it's him, like, do you want to hold him? And she says no. At that time, she thought that just might be too difficult to hold me. And Taylor told me later, like she always regretted that, the rest of her life, that I don't think she necessarily had second thoughts about the adoption, but who knows, she might have if she had held me. But she didn't do it. And then, she was in the hospital for a day or two. She goes back, she recuperates in the apartment, and then she doesn't have to drive back. She's able to fly back actually to East Texas. And she gets back there, and nobody talks about it ever again. So she never has another conversation, from my understanding, with her parents or the aunt. They passed away a while ago, but it was just
Did Tracy know? at this point?
Tracy did not know.
Tracy
Oh,
did
And
not
she never
Tracy,
know.
told him.
so she had not, like, she had broken up with him by the time the pregnancy came along. And so she decided not to tell him, and they were not in contact. I mean, he does come back in the story later, but yeah, at that point, he is not. He had no idea he had fathered the child, and so she goes back to Texas, goes on to her life. She ends up going to another school, like a liberal arts college. She meets a man there who's not my biological father. She does tell him that she had given up a child up for adoption, and apparently he's very wonderful. Like, well, he's kind of like, well, let's go get him. It's
Oh,
like, he was a Marine officer, just like, well, let's go get, like, I don't know, like come in a helicopter, like he's going to rappel down and like pick me up and bring me back to Texas or somehow.
it's kind.
But she's like, well, no, I relinquished him. I relinquished him. And
Bob, I think it's interesting going back really quick. The parents were willing to have her raise you.
yes,
That's
yes.
interesting. It's not usually the
And
case, right?
no, and I know that's not uncommon. That's uncommon as reading about these stories of women who give them up for adoption.
Were her
It
parents
was not
educated?
choice one. Yes, and so I don't know if her mother had gone to college, but the father was. I mean, the father was a medical doctor, a
Doctor.
neurologist, the only one in town.
Yeah,
So
so they maybe that's a different, in a different
yeah,
socioeconomic situation that
I mean, I think that part of the. I mean, they I mean, what would have happened? I mean, I'm sure there would have been some financial support. It probably would not have continued forever. It's, it's
Yeah,
still the early 70s. The stigma, or, the scarlet letter of like being an unwed mother, that was beginning to taper off, or I don't know how you phrase it, somewhat, as the 70s went on to the 80s. Would have been hard, like trying to raise
for sure.
a child on her own. So there's no denying that. And so there is a truth to the fact that we were separated, but she's
Mhm.
able to go on and get married and you know have a middle class life. And then I'm adopted. I'm actually adopted by a physician's family. My adopted father was an orthopedic surgeon. He was finishing medical school or residency at that time, and then became a doctor. As a side note, I remember after meeting Taylor, like, oh, isn't that interesting? Like, you were raised by a doctor, and I was raised by a doctor, and it was like a year later, like I'm in bed again, and I'm like, that's probably not an accident. I mean, we were probably matched by the adoption agency. That's when matching was quite common, not just about a race, but sometimes broadly among class or something like that. And so it could have been an accident, but I think there's probably a good chance it wasn't. Is that
Right.
is that here is this couple who, the doctor or would-be doctor that wants a baby, and here's a woman who is looking to relinquish her child, and she's from a doctor's family, and I think they just put us together. I mean, that's my theory, because it wasn't just done through a lawyer, it was actually done through an adoption agency. And my sense is that's where the matching really was done, trying to match people of similar races and religions and of class.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
so I think that was probably um, um, a manufactured connection to some extent by the adoption agency.
Now, did Taylor have other kids?
She tried throughout the 1970s to have children, was not able to.
Mm.
So in the early 1980s, her and her husband adopted two
Oh,
kids
how
from
interesting.
South Korea.
Oh,
Mm.
Because by that point, I mean, I don't know if they had really looked for adopting domestically, but the number of adoptees, you well know, plummet
yeah.
Hmm.
in the 70s. Like the high point of infant adoptions, stranger infant adoptions, was about 89,000 around 1970, and then it drops down to 1975. It's down to 44,000. And so it just kind of, it plummets. Women are more likely to hold on to their babies. And, by 1973, abortion is legal throughout the country. So as Jean Sisson, I think you interviewed her from
Mm-hmm.
Relinquished, like she talks about it, not
Oh,
approvingly, but there
Gretchen.
is a market,
Yeah.
Gretchen, yeah.
the market of domestic babies basically dwindles by the 70s and
Yes.
80s. And so increasingly people who want to adopt are looking increasingly internationally, and that changes over the decades. And so the 80s, a source, if you could phrase it like that, for babies is going to be South Korea. And so so Taylor adopts and has to fully grown adopted children from South Korea. And so she is connected to various parts of the adoption triad, I guess we would
Big
call
time, I
it.
think.
Yeah, yeah.
It's interesting.
Mhm.
And so,
Um,
yeah, go ahead.
oh, just so you talked to her on the phone. Do you have a relationship still? Did you
Yeah,
meet?
it's funny. She, I mean, we talk, um, um, well, I don't know, I guess 3 or 4 times a year. It's funny, strangely enough, like she texted last night. I told her, about this, and we're going to talk on the phone in a few days. And so, and I've been down to Texas to meet her. And so, shortly after, we spoke on the phone back in 2008. I mean, I think like a month later, I flew down, to Texas with my wife to meet, her and her children who were adopted. And then it was funny later on that summer, she had a big party for me. She called it Bobfest 2009, and so she actually made these
Oh,
T-shirts. They're
fest.
like these rock T-shirts, and so it said Bobfest 2009 on the front, and then the back. It was very helpful because she has. I mean, I guess they're my family too to some extent, like a very large Texas family, and so it had all the names of like various people in the Texas family to help. They're on like on the ball of the back of the t-shirt. And so I came to this party, Bob Fest. It was like went all day. It was Texas, so there was like barbecue outside and met all these people, with kind of these thick Texas accents, many of them who looked somewhat like me. So anyway, there I was.
Did
Did you
now,
feel, yeah, did you feel embraced by this? Like
Yeah,
your family there? Mm-hmm.
no, it was great. They were, and this was a surprise to them because most of them did not know that Taylor had given up a child for adoption all those years ago, including her adopted children didn't know. So they had not known, even though she
Um,
adopted these two children from South Korea, they did not know that Taylor herself had relinquished a child all those years ago.
did
did
that
you
make,
and the
oh,
kids from her adopted kids connect on an adoptee level? And were they biological siblings or were they two
No, they were not
separate?
biological
Okay.
siblings. So I would say not that much. I'm friends with them on Facebook. So I see things from them from time to time. Uh, but no, we haven't really kind of stayed in touch or connected in that way. I think partly because they're like there's no biological connection.
There's nothing. I just meant as an adoptee,
Oh yes, no, not. I
you
wouldn't
know.
say really as an adoptee either. That didn't really kind of come together
I
either.
was more, I
It's
was
very cordial
thinking,
and nice, and there's nothing, I don't bad at anything with it. But I would say, yeah, we haven't like connected that much. A little bit with the daughter. Sarah is her name. So somewhat there.
I
So
was
I
thinking
mean, are
more
there
like if, yeah, if they see Bob Fest, if they're thinking, who are my, like, because she's being very open. I was
Yeah.
wondering if it led them to wonder about their
Yeah,
lives.
and I don't know that
Yeah,
because since I'm not close to them, I haven't brought up that question. I'm
right.
sure Taylor would talk with me somewhat to the extent to which she felt she could, because that's their kind of story and her
right?
relationship
Yeah.
with them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if I think I would have heard. I think I did bring this up earlier. Like, have they searched? Because now increasingly
The
people
whole
are
South
going back
Korea
to South
Right.
Korea
politics.
to
Hmm.
try and find their birth family, and to my sense, they haven't done that or
Mm.
expressed much interest in doing that.
Back to your story, did so Tracy, did he must have gotten a big shock to
Well, here's a funny story. So when I met Taylor, and I'm talking with her in Texas, my first visit. She had not been in contact with Tracy, and they broke up. And they had not been in contact in 38 years. And she's like, "I'm going to help you find him. I'm going to find him for you." So she's like on the case to find him. And so she remembered his name, remembered his last name, and begins to do a search. And where she finds him is on classmates.com. Do you remember that like
Yep.
early, like now,
Yeah.
like defunct, like early kind of social media is like meet your classmates? I mean, like why you
I
would do
still
that
get
and not
emails
you're
from
still
it, by the
getting,
way.
yeah, you can
They
never get
never
off.
go away.
It's like this like defunct, I mean, it like lives on a server somewhere. The only place it's like a fax machine, it's like a blast from the past. And so she
Telex.
she finds him on classmates.com. She had a vague memory of where he went to high school, and that's part with classmates. Like, here's his name, and I think probably a sense of what his age was. He went to high school, so that's got to be him. It's a fairly unusual name, and unusual for a man to have that name, Tracy Benson. So, well, you can't email somebody directly, but like a lot of social media, you can email through some sort of message. Like you go through the messaging, and so she sends him this message through classmates.com and saying like, "Oh, hello, Tracy. I hope you've been doing well, like for the past 40 years." And I don't know if you remember, like we dated in the early 70s, University of Houston, end of paragraph. And then, she sent this all to me, so I saw it before it's sent out. So then the second paragraph is, oh, I have something to tell you, is that, I've got pregnant and you were the father. And I relinquished him for adoption. I didn't see him, blah, blah, blah. And now he's come back into my life. And I'm hoping you'd be willing to talk to him and meet him. Silence. So it just like goes out through classmates.com. And then like a day or two later, he checks email, whatever, because we never get rid of classmates.com emails. And so,
Never.
so says, oh, yeah, I remember you. And then it goes back and forth a little bit. And then he agrees to talk to me. And so we do talk a couple times on the phone. Now, Tracy, by that point, had, he had married and had a son with the woman that he married. So technically, I have a half brother, Tracy. I've never met him. But the mother, Tracy's wife, clearly very threatened by
Oh,
this.
it's
Um,
so,
it's unusual because it's not like they
I
had been going
know.
together. I mean, like he met this woman probably a decade after he'd been with Taylor. I'm not like coming back, like asking for money to intrude into their lives. And so uh and then I exchanged a few emails with Tracy, but then I got an email from his wife, and it was
Ugh,
very nasty to both me
really?
and to Taylor, that basically you have no idea what, how much, you've changed your life, and then how much you're hurting my son, of their
Oh my
biological full
goodness.
son, and all of this. And it's funny, I'm sure from the history of adoption, certainly back in the day, if people found out you were adopted, like they might call you a bastard, right? It was
Hmm.
a real pejorative. And, that era fortunately was gone. I was never called that in my life. And let me be clear, she did not call me that word either. But when I read that, I was like, that's the first time I've really experienced that. I mean, that was basically what it
That was the
is
meaning.
that was the meaning behind that. Like, whatever you say, I mean, she was not denying or trying to say that Tracy was the father, but, he's not really the father and you're not really the son, is we have a son and you're
Oh
not
my God.
it. And just,
That's
that.
dismissing the son having a brother too,
Yes, and
that
he
he
did
may
write me at about
enjoy.
that time. He was a 17-year-old and he did write me, and it was a very nice email.
Oh,
And I said, it's great to have this email from you. And it was a bit awkward because I'm an adult and he's just like a minor. I mean, he's like 17. And so I just said, like, if I think if we're going to contact anymore, you probably have a conversation with your parents so they at least know you're doing this. And, and if they're okay, or a few years down the road, if you want to talk to me, we can do that. And I've never heard from him since. And so that was, I don't know, 17 years ago. So
oh,
yeah, he's a middle-aged man now. So I do have a half
You've
brother out there somewhere.
you've
And
not even
then,
tried?
Tracy, later I said, when I when I found Taylor and when I found Tracy, I was actually living in California. I had actually had a postdoc at Stanford, a fellowship at Stanford at the time, and I was living out there for the year. And I said, well, when I come back out east, because Tracy was living out east at that time, he's no longer living in Texas. And I said, well, maybe we can meet. I don't know, like meet at a diner or something like that. And um, he said, well, my wife is still not very is upset about all of this, and then I never heard anything. But here's the funny thing is, so by that point, it's a social media age. Like I had become, he was on Facebook. I've been friends with on Facebook. And so the friends was on Facebook, and then we weren't going to meet. It just kind of petered out. And then I know it was like about 2011. I'm like, this is silly. Like I have my Facebook father, and so I should why am I've deleted friends from like high school. Like why do I have this Facebook father who's can he periodically like things like randomly, just random like I'd be talking about some movie like oh I like that movie, like Facebook father would kind of come out and like give me a thumbs up. So what I
Facebook
like.
father.
And so I just like, ugh, enough. So I just like deleted him and
You
then
deleted
unfriended him, whatever it is called. And so then, but then a year off later, like you have a friend request from Tracy Denson,
Oh,
Tracy, and I'm like, okay, whatever. And so he's been on there ever since. And so periodically, totally randomly, sometimes it's funny. I'll have two people will like something very quickly, and it's my birth mother, my birth father, who have not met, who have not been together in the same room in 53 years, and they're liking some random thing that I've done and I've posted on Facebook. So I do have a father, I have a Facebook father, but I haven't.
he's clearly
I do.
interested in you, and he's being very controlled at home, and that's
Yeah,
sad because time goes on.
yes. And
That
I have
should be a
to,
red flag for his marriage.
I
yes,
agree.
yes. Well, to be honest, I think he's divorced. I don't think that necessarily I was the cause of that, but it's clear like they're not together. And so, I mean, if he wanted, I mean, I'm not going to go out there and kind of approach him about it. If he wants to, I'd certainly meet him. But I'd say, I've had conversations both with Taylor and I've conversations with my wife. Like, is this like I don't want to put words in the mouth, but something kind of like, do you have this like deep longing, like to meet him? Do you need to meet him? And I said, no, actually, I really don't.
Okay.
I think it's kind of strange. I remember once, it's funny, I have a son, so he's 14, and he knows that I'm adopted. He knows a little bit about this story. And it was like 4 years ago, and we were on this hike. We were hiking around Walden Pond, of all places in Massachusetts. And it, kids just come to the front, and he's just like, yes, it's very sad that your dad doesn't want to meet you. Like, why doesn't he want to meet you? And so
Yeah.
I'm trying to explain to this 10-year-old about this sort of situation. And, it's clear like it just kind of popped in his head randomly, like we were walking around this pond about, why does your dad not want to meet you? And I explained it to him. And then, for a 10-year-old, he'd like listen pretty closely for about 5 minutes. And then like, and that was that. Like, then come up again with,
But truly, that's his relative too.
yeah.
So it
And
is,
so
it
that's
is,
his biological
that's right.
grandfather. And so part of who he is
Yeah.
partly because of Tracy. I mean, I think more to meet Tracy is, I certainly see aspects of my personality and temperament with my birth mother, Taylor, like you just way we talk and like kind of our mannerisms and things like that. And just see it with her. And I would presume that I have some of that with Tracy. And that would just be interesting to see. And again, particularly everything I know about behavioral genetics. I mean, part of that's personal, part of it's just kind of intellectually. It would just be kind of interesting to
For
see
sure.
that.
Is he still on the East Coast or East?
I think he actually moved back to Texas because
Mm.
he has some extended family there. So I think he's back in Texas now. But I think he'd lived for decades out on the East Coast, probably
I
just like a 6-hour drive from me.
I'm wondering about your half brother. I mean, he's an adult. That
Yeah.
could be a really interesting connection for you.
Yeah. Quite frankly, I thought like I was talking about with my wife is like when he'll come back into my life is when he's getting married. Because his wife will be like, well, you got to go meet him. They're gonna.
Yes.
It's like, why do you not have any interest in this? I mean, I figured it'd be
true.
something like that. And so, but that has. I mean, I don't know if he's married or not. That has not happened. But I figured that's when it's happened. It'd be like later that, some spouse would kind of drag him into doing
It's
that.
usually how that
But
works, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah. But I'm easy to find. I have a certain presence on the
Presence.
web because I'm a professor. I'd be very easy to find.
Yeah. Have you
Mhm.
Well,
looked for
this is
him?
No, I haven't. I felt like that is, he knows about me, and I guess I don't have a deep desire for that, but I'm sorry, I don't have a deep desire for that, but I'd certainly be open if he was interested and wanted to meet me. I would certainly talk with him.
Yeah.
G- on a light note, are Tracy and Taylor Facebook friends? Surely they see each other liking your
They
posts.
must.
They're not Facebook friends, but they see it through my Facebook. It's just like such a weird. I mean, all this happened as social media was emerging. I mean, I think when I met Taylor, I mean, it was 2008, so I think I had been on. I think I just started on Facebook. I mean, so all this emerges during the social media era, which is
Mhm.
also made it wonderful and weird. So I follow Taylor. I mean, she's in her 70s, so she posts a lot on Facebook. So I follow what she's doing on Facebook, and she sees what I'm doing on Facebook, and then we talk on the phone a few times a year. We'll talk a few days from now.
Wow.
Mhm.
Well, this has been a really interesting
That
story.
is
Thank you
interesting.
for coming on and sharing it.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, and I really appreciate you doing this. I mean, I was thinking, so we were talking about adoptees earlier. So in my life, in terms of knowing adoptees, so domestic infant adoptees. So I've met adoptees who are adopted internationally, but adoptees who are adopted as infants. So I've known 5 people in my life. So I knew my sister, I knew an administrative assistant in my academic department, a fellow historian at SU, and then I've known the 2 of you, and I've known you for an hour, and I'm 53 years old. And
Wow.
so at
I was
this
gonna say
point
we're in that.
in my
Wow.
life, that I've only known 5 other, domestic adoptees who are adopted in kind of this way, and you're among them. It's the first conversation I've ever had with 2 other
Bob,
adoptees simultaneously, and
you should
so
join our
Interesting.
adoptee cafe.
okay,
We meet once a month
okay, I'd
with
be
a
happy to do that.
with a group of adoptees. We'll send you the Patreon link, and
Yeah, I'd
we
appreciate that. I'd be
first one
happy to do that.
starts in a week. That your first one would start in a week, and it's great. It's really an incredible group.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. And I'm
Hmm.
absolutely, I'll do that. And then, yeah, I mean, the fact that you can have these communities using, the internet and podcasting and social media and whatnot to do that, it just was impossible when I was young. It
And
just
there
didn't
Live
are
come.
podcast
groups.
event back east.
There
Yes.
are
Yes.
groups that Adoptees Connect. I'm sure there's one in Syracuse and around.
Yeah,
So there
I'll
are
look into
ways
that.
people meet in person, and
Mhm.
it's
It'll be good
great.
to know of another adoptee besides Superman, basically.
Yeah.
That would be, that would be
Well,
nice.
we
Yes.
have
So
resources in our show notes, and we
great. I'll
can
look into
connect
more.
you, and we'll send you our Patreon and for you to join. So that would
Yeah,
be
I
great.
appreciate that.
And we're
Well,
gonna
Yeah.
thanks
put
for
your
doing that.
article. Can we put your article in the show notes for
Yeah,
people?
absolutely.
Okay, good.
And you might put a little thing. I don't know if you ever do this, like I think it's like behind like a paywall. I don't know if you're able to just load it up, just load it up.
I think
You
we
have a
can.
PDF. Yeah, just do
Yeah.
that. Just do that. You
Yeah.
feel free to do
We'll
that.
figure out a way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bob. So nice to meet you.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice to
thanks,
meet you.
Sarah and Louisa. Really appreciate it.
We enjoyed this. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.